evening, and welcome to the first ever conversation in the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences Spotlight Speaker Series, part of the Advocating for Equity initiative within the school. I'm Dr. Sherry Warren, Director of Equity for the Mandel School, and I am so pleased this evening to welcome Dr. Edith Guffey, a social worker with vast experience in leading organizations and advocating for those among us whose voices are all too often silenced or shushed. Organizing for people who have historically been serving those at the table rather than joining those at the table. And a woman whose skills are now being focused on leading yet another national organization as the board chair of PFLAG National. Please welcome me in joining Dr. Edith Guffey.
Hi, Sherry. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm the first, and so I'm used to being the first in a lot of things. So this is the first of your Spotlight Speaker Series, and it's quite the honor to be here.
Well, we are thrilled to have you with us tonight to hear about your illustrious career, as well as hear about what you are up to with PFLAG National and how we can learn and follow in your footsteps and continue the incredible advocacy work that you have done for so long. I would love it if you could make sure that our viewers know a little bit about PFLAG and what your role is as the chair.
Sure. PFLAG is the largest organization that's dedicated to supporting, educating, and advocating for the LGBTQ plus community and those who love them. Been in existence for over 50 years, started by a mother who simply wanted her child to have the rights of anyone else. And that's how PFLAG started. There are over 400 local chapters in communities across the country. And we really do, we're for all LGBTQ plus people, but people who come to us most frequently are parents. Parents who are learning how to support their kids, who want to know more, who are kind of confused about pronouns, wherever they are, and whatever questions they have. PFLAG is here to support them and to support their kids. And it's not just kids, it's allies, people who are allies of the LGBTQ plus community. I think we all know this is an especially difficult time, especially for trans kids and their families. And PFLAG stands ready and is very much engaged in providing support to this community. And I'm the board chair. I've been on PFLAG's board since 2019, right before COVID. My timing is not great. And I became chair in October. Again, my timing is not great. But I say to folks, we are here for such a time as this, when we are called to serve and where we are called to serve. Who knew that we would be in this place at this time? So that's a bit about PFLAG. It's pretty much volunteer. There is a national office in DC with about 29 staff, but the chapters across the country are volunteer led.
And then what kind of work happens at the DC office and how much are you involved with that?
Well, it seems like I'm involved quite a bit these days. The DC office has support for chapters. You know, chapter leaders need guidance. They need training. They have questions, especially today. And the national office has persons who are dedicated to supporting chapters. We have communications staff, of course, and we have advocacy staff. And that really is pretty much what is done in the national offices. So education, support, and advocacy, those are our three pillars. And the support is really a big piece, supporting our chapters as they support families, kids, loved ones who are in their communities, because every community is different. And so the chapter engagement team does a lot of support with our chapters.
Fantastic. Who all do you work in coalition with or consider organizational allies as that work takes place?
Well, of course, you know, there are allies of other LGBTQ plus groups, HRC, GLSEN, trans equality, all of those are the Trevor Project. They're all kind of partners in this work. But we're really working and thinking about how we expand partnerships with other groups that are not specifically LGBTQ focused, but have kids and families as their focus. And so things like the PTA or the Children's Defense Fund, Jack and Jill, what other organizations that really are committed to supporting kids and families? And how do we establish better partnerships with these groups? We're in the midst of a strategic plan, actually, and just started. Get this, it's a strategic plan with a DEI lens. Such great timing, right? On our parts. But just because some folks don't like DEI doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do.
That's absolutely right, Edith. One thing I have learned about DEI, or within social work, we often call it ADEI, as our accrediting body, this Council on Social Work Education, refers to it. Uh, I did not realize how many people thought of this type of work as only about how folks get hired. I really did not know that there was that narrow lens and that people are really quite surprised right now when programs that have helped in so many different settings and people of all kinds of identities. Folks are surprised that those have been going away, not realizing what DEI included.
You know, Sherry, that's a really good point. You know, DEI has been it's been used in so many ways that are incorrect. You know, to indicate that people who have been hired in these positions aren't qualified. You know, we used to be called affirmative action hires. You know, so oh yeah, you got your job only because of your race, or you're a woman, or you know. But DEI really is saying the importance of having diversity as skills and perspectives in our midst, in our companies. You know, studies show that companies are better when they have diverse people and diverse thinking. And actually, the group that has benefited most from DEI are white women. Uh, that's just a fact. But many people think it's all people of color getting ahead where they don't deserve this, they're not qualified for that. And that's really just a total misunderstanding of DEI. And I think that misunderstanding has been intentional. Um, Intentional use of target as a target to help other people feel disenfranchised, like something is being taken away from them if we have a perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think maybe the words maybe change, but there are people pushing back to say a culture of belonging, a culture of being inclusive of all. You know, I have just really mixed feelings about that because in some ways it feels like giving in, but I know that sometimes compromise is important, and what's important is the inclusion and the work and the equity. You call it what you want, that's fine, but what's important is actually doing the work.
I agree completely. And I like how you talked about uh, that our systems, our businesses, our organizations, our communities are better when we have more diversity and better inclusion and higher equity happening. I always take it back to ecological systems theory. We know our ecological systems are healthier when they are more diverse. And to me, humanity is just one gigantic ecological system.
It's
I love
feeling
your
a little screwing
perspective.
up these days.
Well, and as we see when we uh, do something damaging to one of our smaller micro ecological systems, things go a kilter and are not as healthy, and we experience the exact same thing as humans.
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk a little bit, Edith, about your journey to get where you are. And you can kind of start wherever you want, but I was curious about people who were influential in your life who helped you become the advocate that you are.
Sherry, that's an interesting question because as I began thinking about being here today, my parents were not much into advocacy, really because they were into living day by day. I grew up in the core, people would call it the core city now, it's the inner city of Kansas City. And they were just trying to get by day. Remember, I was born well, you don't remember, you don't know this. I was born in 1953, so I'm 70 now. A child of the Brown versus Board of Education. And I started school in an all-white school. And so I think one of the most important things my parents did to prepare me for the work I'm doing now was to instill in me the importance of respecting each person. No matter who they were, no matter where they came from, each person deserved respect. And that was just part of the foundation that I grew up with. It wasn't actually until, believe it or not, I began to work for the church, the United Church of Christ, that the issue of advocacy really became forefront for me. Yeah, I went to college, but I didn't have a sense of my own identity of who I was or who I am as an African American woman. I hadn't real that was not fully developed when I was in college, and I was more into kind of rejecting this sort of theory that all people are bad if you're one color, or all people are good if you're one color. That was just too far from where I grew up. And so it wasn't until I got involved with the United Church of Christ, and if you grow up in the Black community as I did, church was always central. And so we went to church a lot, but it was Baptist and they were not as inclusive. But when I went to the United Church of Christ and really looked at the commitment of that denomination in ordaining women and being on the front lines of the LGBTQ fight and acceptance, um, and really learn the importance of using my own voice. When I started in the national setting, I was one of the youngest executives. And on top of that, I was not ordained. So I was the youngest person, not ordained. And I know this is hard to believe, I was pretty reticent to speak up. And the woman who sat next to me all the time, her name was Valerie Russell. And she would just sort of nudge me all the time and say, speak up, speak up. And that is where her encouragement really was helpful in helping me find my voice and understanding how my voice could be used. And for me to decide how I chose to have my voice be used in the way that I chose to use it and not in the way that someone else might tell me I should use it. So those years were really very important to me. Those first 5 or 10 years that I worked in the national setting. I was a chief operating officer, so my work was not really advocacy. But when you're in that environment, and I was a chief operating officer and an officer of the church. So I did the technical stuff, but I was also expected to speak out about the church. And that is really where I began to understand the power and the importance of advocacy. So that's how it started with me.
And thank you, Edith. For our viewers who aren't as familiar with the United Church of Christ, or your incredible work there, how did you go from Baptist pews to what some might consider a fairly radical or progressive setting? And then how did you climb, I think, quickly to chief operating officer?
Well, there's something to be said for mentoring. And there's something to be said for seeing people who look like you. Um, I um, I didn't know anything about the United Church of Christ. I grew up Baptist and figured I put in all my church hours when I was in high school and at home. But when I went to college and graduated from college and I'm in Lawrence, Kansas, I decided to look for a church just because I'd slept. I mean, you can sleep on Sunday mornings for only so long, I guess. And I went to a church only because when I was in college, this church had opened their doors to a drama group I was in. And we had our end of the year banquets there. I knew nothing about the church. I knew nothing about their theology, none of that. But when I decided to go to church in Lawrence, I picked this church, and it was Plymouth Congregational Church, a United Church of Christ. And the pastor was preaching about things that mattered to me, like care for those who are on the margins. And I'm a social worker, so this matters to me about justice. Not justice, in the pearly gates here later on, but justice here in this world. And that was a new take for me. I had not experienced the church in the public square in that way. And that said to me, what's going on here? Because they were talking about ways to use your faith to make the world a better place. And then I went to some kind of convention or something, and there was a woman preaching. It was a Black woman, and I had never seen a woman in the pulpit, let alone a Black woman. And her name was Yvonne Delk. And from there on, I said, maybe this church has something for me. And that is where I became involved in the church and advocacy. And people gave me lots of opportunities to learn more about the United Church of Christ. And someone called me up one day when I was working at the University of Kansas and said, "We think you should apply for this position." And I said, "I don't think it's a very good idea. I just started a new job today." But I applied and I got it. Surprise to me, I got it and moved my family to Cleveland. And so we had lots of opportunities. People gave me opportunities, they gave me information, they encouraged me, they supported me, and I had the opportunity to take an amazing position that changed my life. And I have no doubt it changed the life of my children.
Wow. So you've mostly done administrative work then. I know that often some people think of social workers pretty narrowly in what kind
Yeah.
of work we do and what kind of settings they will find us in. And I know you have mostly been an administrator, which of course is part of social work. Did you find that you were using your social work skills or your education a great deal in these settings that weren't necessarily traditional social work?
Absolutely. First of all, I went the administrative track in social work rather than the clinical track because I was a chicken, because clinical work is so hard and it takes such patience. And I just knew that was not, even though my heart was there, I wanted to do that work. I knew that that's not where my gifts were. And so I went the administrative track intentionally thinking in administration, the ability to work on policy and change policy could have an impact. And many people said, I'm sorry, it's too bad you're not using your social work skills. And I'm saying, you obviously never worked in the church. you know, the thing about social work skills, you use them everywhere. How you relate to people, how you listen, how you build coalitions. Those are skills that work in any setting. And while I thought I would be working in a traditional social work setting as maybe doing policy or administration or something, that just wasn't in the cards. That just was not what came for me. It didn't happen that way. And that's okay because I can look back and see my education served me well and continues to serve me well.
And so what you thought was going to happen isn't what came for you. It sounds like that's what happened with PFLAG to a degree of stepping into this board leadership position. Was that on your radar?
It was not on my radar, having been so active in the United Church of Christ, my eldest child, Brian, identifies as non-binary. And Brian came out to us as gay in 1995. The world is very different now than it was in 1995. But we did not turn to PFLAG for any support. I kind of knew a little about PFLAG, but only hearing its name, not much, didn't really know much about it. But then as Brian went to college, Brian was in a fraternity at Kent State for, they called it gay men and their allies. That's what they were called at the time. And Brian would, at Thanksgiving, Brian said to me, the fraternity is hosting a dinner at Thanksgiving. I said, what do you mean hosting a dinner at Thanksgiving? And they said, for kids who can't go home. I said, what do you mean they can't go home? The distance, the money? No, their parents have refused to let them come home because they're gay. And for me, that was it. I'm like, you do not do that. That is, I mean, for me as a parent, you love your kid no matter what trouble they get in, no matter what challenge they are, no matter who they are, you love your kid. And so that said to me at that time, okay, Edith, you sat on the sidelines on the LGBTQ plus issues because Brian is fine. Brian has known that they were loved, they were supported by us, by their church community, but that's not true for everybody. And so I had it in the back of my mind that I needed to do something, but that must have been in, from 2000 to 2000. I had no idea what that was. And then someone came to me. She was on a committee that I worked on. I was in Kansas at the time. And she said, would you consider being on the board of PFLAG? And I was like, PFLAG? Let me do a little research. I knew about PFLAG, but didn't know a lot about it. And I knew that I was going to retire sometime in the next 2 to 3 years from when she asked. And I knew that whatever I did, it had to be something I felt passionate about. Because if I'm going to give my time, it has to be something I care about. And the more I research PFLAG and what they do or the advocacy piece, and I thought about those kids who couldn't go home for dinner. I felt, okay, this is it for me. This is my opportunity to respond to what I said to myself several years ago, get off the sidelines. And so that's how I became involved in PFLAG.
Oh, I might start to make that my new motto, get off the sidelines. I like that. You brought up advocacy, and that's really what we're here about, Edith, is to talk about how social workers and all of us really can learn to be better advocates and also make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we can continue to be advocates because it can be easy to throw yourself all in and get burnt out pretty quickly. I want to clarify something with our viewers right now. I'm sorry I disabled the chat, but the Q&A is open. And I see we already have one question, which I'm going to give to Edith here in a little bit. So if you have other questions, please feel free to go ahead and type those into the Q&A, and we'll have some time to ask Edith some questions here in a little bit. But one of my questions about advocacy is, what are some of the essential skills that that you think makes effective advocacy?
I would say the ability to communicate across all spectrum, all people, meeting people where they are, if they're in a reasonable place, I must say, but the ability to communicate is really important. Uh, and I believe that advocacy is really built on relationships. I think having strong relationships so that people trust you and you know that you trust the people that you're working with is really important. And the ability to get things done, follow through. It's great to have a good heart, to feel passionate, to have good relationships. But if you have plans and you can't execute them, or you don't know how to get others to work with you to execute them, then, it's passion is great, but it doesn't get things done. So I would really say communication, relationship building, and the ability to execute are really, really important skills, or they have been for me.
Did those skills come pretty naturally to you?
I, you know, yes. And that's because I went into administration rather than clinical. I think knowing where your gifts are and where they are not is really important, because the skills you don't have, someone else does. And you can support the skills that someone else does and then build on the skills that you have. So identifying where you have skills and where you're strong is really important, because sometimes taking on things that just aren't you, not only does it become frustrating, it can be harmful. So I try and stay in my lane. Sometimes I'm forced to go outside my lane, but I try and build on the skills that I have and use them as best I can.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Edith. I want to go ahead and hop to a couple of the questions that are in the Q&A. One person, since you brought up your son, would like to know how your son feels about the work that you do.
Brian, who goes by they, them, Brian feels good about the work that I do. They keep their lives pretty separate. They're not in and out of PFLAG stuff all the time. But Brian feels good about it. It's not surprised that I'm doing it, but is has a bit, I think, of pride that I'm doing it, because Brian knows that Brian and their life helped shape me as well.
Mhm.
And so, everybody we meet along the way can be a good help shape us in some way, and that includes our kids too.
Mhm.
And Brian, being willing to be who they are, helped to shape me and helped me to be able to speak out and willing to speak out. So Brian feels good about the work that I do.
What a testament to a really wonderful relationship between parent and child. And I feel very strongly that we need mentors of every age, and many of mine are much younger than me. Thank you. We also know that one of the many ways that people are affected by social problems have to do with the intersections of their identities. And one viewer is asking if you have any suggestions for disability advocates during this challenging political time, and that they contribute to diversity when given an opportunity.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that disabilities is covered in DEI. And I think the important thing is to ask that community what they need. I'm not a person that's disabled at this particular time, but who knows, that could happen, to any of us at any time. And so I would just want to say to the disabilities community, we got your back too. And when we are advocating for marginalized people, that includes the disabilities community. There are LGBTQ people who are disabled, who are persons of color. That intersectionality is true in every single area that you can name. And so we should always remember that when we're advocating for marginalized people, that's a pretty big umbrella. And the disabilities community is definitely included. And it may take a little extra work. It may mean changing some of the things we often do or always do. I know talk about the colors on the website for is an important thing for some people. Looking at where you're meeting, and is it accessible? And actually, is it accessible for people time-wise when we're meeting? I mean, there's so many things to consider when we're considering all the communities that we work with.
Absolutely. Thank you. One of our viewers says many young social workers think advocacy happens overnight. Can you speak about the time it takes to do effective advocacy? What are you,
Yeah.
well, and I'll hold the follow-up then.
Yeah, I think this is one of the times that history really helps us. We think of Brown versus Brown in 1954. That first effort to change that was from the Plessy versus Ferguson case in the 1800s. Advocacy, changing systems, and that's what advocacy is working to do, change systems. And systems are resistant to change. It does not happen overnight. It's a long slog. I always say it's a journey, not a sprint. So I think it's important for people working in advocacy, young social workers, anyone, to just sort of brace themselves to know this isn't changing tomorrow. This is going to take a while for it to change. And you know who is really good at this, the long thing? Those are people who are further right. You know how long they worked on changing Roe? How many years they've been working at that? Those advocates were working day after day, year after year, until finally. And we have to be just as persistent and adamant and committed to what we're trying to do. There will be, and it's not always a forward path. We're not always moving forward. It can sometimes feel like a step forward, two steps back. It's not an even, we're going forward all the time. There are setbacks, and it's easy to get discouraged. And when that happens, because it will happen. People will get discouraged. What I tend to do is look at history. Look at history. And I say to myself, what would have happened if people gave up on the civil rights movement? Where would I be? I certainly wouldn't be here. And what if people had given up on the women's ability, right to vote? That took years because systems do not change. Systems do not give up power. And that's what changing systems means and working for justice. We are changing systems and asking people to give up their power or at least share their power. So.
Absolutely. It's interesting times. And just last week, we had a speaker on campus for Black History Month, Reverend Benjamin Golston, who is an advocate and activist in the Cleveland area. And I said something to him at one point about the civil rights movement and how so many younger people don't know anything about the civil rights movement of the 60s. And and I didn't say of the 60s. I said the civil rights movement, and he said, which one?
Yeah.
And
The one we're in now, or
exactly. I was like, oh, how? Good
yeah.
point. You have a friend who has made a comment here, Rosemary Creedon. Oh, you may not know her. She knows you. She says, Edith, when I saw you were speaking, I had to attend. You may not remember me when we went to Gestalt together. Part of my, oh, look at her face. She's remembering. Part of my work as the Associate Director of Trauma Services at Frontline is working with the Youth Acceptance Project. It has been some of the most wonderful work of my 45 plus year career in social work. We are currently working in juvenile court, DCFS, and working with Case Western Reserve University around a grant to support young people who are experiencing suicidal ideation. Thank you for your work, Edith. Keep it up.
Wow, what important work that you're doing, Rosemary. And the suicide rate among teens and among LGBTQ youth, the trauma that people physically carry in their body, is just so great. And to have places that people can go and places that will support them is just so important. So thank you for your work that you're doing, Rosemary.
And speaking of places where people could get support, the Cleveland PFLAG chapter support group is hosted by an Episcopal church, says one of our viewers, Craig. A local UCC church financially contributes to the chapter as part of their mission outreach. What are other examples of supportive churches I will widen that to congregations and faith communities of all kinds can do to help and partner with PFLAG?
Hi, Craig Hoffman.
You knew.
Yes, thank you for what you're doing. I think one of the things that I learned when I started with PFLAG, and I knew this, but I didn't know it, in my bones. When I went to my first PFLAG convention, it was the first time in a long time I was embarrassed to say that I worked for the church. Because the church has done such harm to the LGBTQ plus community. And, I thought, well, but that's not us. That's, we're not that church in the United Church of Christ. We're a different church. But the harm that the church has done to people makes many LGBTQ people reticent to reach out to the church. There have been PFLAG groups that will not meet in a church for that. But I think being able to talk to your PFLAG chapter leaders, ask them what you can do, offering space, and letting them know visibly that you're a safe space, flying that rainbow flag. And Craig, I'm sure your church is doing this, flying that rainbow flag, wearing that rainbow pin, and not being afraid to say, I am a person of faith and I love you as an LGBTQ person. I accept you just as you are. Um, that is so wonderful. And to intentionally seek out a PFLAG group to be part of or to work with or to support, especially right now, because the terror and the fear is so great in this community. That hearing that uh, the church or many of the churches have their backs and that will stand with them and will support them is really, really important. When I started PFLAG, they just got a new executive director. Brian Bond had been there since May, and I started in October. And they vet board members pretty deep, pretty thoroughly. And he said to me, I don't think a person should have to choose between God and who they love. And I said, I would agree with that. And so I no longer am reticent about speaking as a person of faith in the PFLAG setting because that's who I am. I can't deny that. But just as no one wants to be put in a box, neither do I as a person of faith because my faith is inclusive and expansive and welcoming. And I think it's important for LGBTQ people to hear that that is true for many people of faith, despite the loud rhetoric from others.
It sure did seem like that was the message that was being shared at Pride in the Clee in early June this last year, where there were numerous faith communities marching in the parade and having booths. And I was there and had some conversations with some of our United Methodist Church friends who have been through a really traumatic breakup.
Yeah. And during that, this June, where Pride Month has been sort of taken off the calendar, where they tried to wipe out trans people, being fully present and speaking out during what's traditionally Pride Month will be so important this year. Saying, you can't wipe people off just by saying it's so. People are still here. We're still supporting you. We're still standing with you. That will be so important this June.
Absolutely. Here's a related question from one of the viewers, Edith, saying, I'm glad you referenced people on the right. Given your role, how do we engage in civil dialogue with people we don't agree with, and how can we not lose our patience?
I don't like that question.
I know. Sorry, I didn't.
No,
You
no,
can't
no.
pass. You don't get to
Yeah.
pass.
No, no, no. I'm not going to pass. It is really hard. One of the PFLAG things is we meet people where they are. And I said, wait a minute, that's true to a certain extent, but people who are being abusive, disrespectful, I'm going to call them out. And I don't think there are people on the right who are, let's just say, ignorant. They've not had the experience, they've not had exposure, and they're simply taking what they hear. Now, if they're open to dialogue and communication, I think a social worker that has those kind of skills and willingness to do that will do that. All of you will do that. Um, and you will be as patient as you can. You will listen. But I do think there comes a point that we say, okay, we're going to disagree. We're going to disagree. You're going to be who you are. I'm not going to devalue you as a person, but I disagree strongly. And this is the harm you are causing. This is the harm you are creating. And I can't condone that. And try and be as non-judgmental. This is so easy to say. I know it's so easy to say that you're just going to have to let them be, because some people, you're never going to change their mind. You're not going to change their mind, and accepting that and try to minimize the harm that they do to others by the way that you treat others and how you stand up for others. It is hard not to lose your patience. I know, as a woman of color, it's hard to me not to lose my patience when people say just absolutely ignorant things. But find a way to let that out. I write to let that out. I say things in my writing that I would never say, to someone face to face. But sometimes you just have to let them be.
Well said. We have social workers in all different parts of their academic careers as well as their professional careers out in the world. And this one is maybe for those folks who are a little bit newer to social work or advocacy work in general. What is something that they can do to support your work?
Well, I would like them, if you don't really know about PFLAG, go to the website uh, to really learn what we do. People think that we're just sort of a nice, warm, cozy organization that supports people. Yeah, we do that too. A parent comes that needs support and care. Yes, our chapters do that. But we also advocate. We have a Get Out the Vote campaign. We filed lawsuit. We have filed a lawsuit, PFLAG versus Trump, about the federal funding for gender affirming care. Learn the breadth of what PFLAG does so that you will be prepared if the time comes to engage with PFLAG, to refer to PFLAG, to support what PFLAG does. We think we're well known, but people do not know. There are a lot of people that don't know what PFLAG does. So I would ask you to learn about us, ask us questions, challenge us, use our resources. There's a slew of resources that you will find online that if you're working with an organization, there are many virtual groups. There's a group for military dads. There's a group for grandparents that people can join virtually. So if you're looking for support for a particular population, you will probably find it on the PFLAG website. Or call me, send me a text, send me an email, and I'll be happy to work with you.
Thank you, Edith. And if there's a particular phone number or email address you want me to share as follow-up with our viewers, you and I can talk about that later.
Okay.
All right. What is one piece of advice that you received that has made an impression on you professionally?
Only one. uh,
There's
yeah, and
don't choose a
yeah,
few.
yeah. I really do think back to the days that I started in the national offices where Valerie Russell said, "Find your voice and use your voice," because I wasn't doing that yet, and that gave me the impetus to sit around the table with people that I thought were more experienced than me, had more of this than me, all of that. They have what I don't have. And to say your voice is as important as anyone else's at the table. I may decide not to use it right away because I'm gathering more information, more data before I speak. But I always hear Valerie saying, "Speak up, use your voice," and that has been something that has stuck with me throughout my years.
We all need those people.
We do indeed, we do.
And we all, I think, can benefit from realizing that even when our voice shakes, what we have to say matters.
Right. I almost always feel that I screwed up somewhere, but I mean, I'm human. So.
Exactly. In preparation for this interview, Edith, we had asked you if you could recommend a reading, a podcast, a resource, something like that that you think would be helpful to our viewers.
Yeah, I thought about that. And I know this is an academic institution, and I probably should have gotten something really academic, but I didn't. I want to recommend a book that says "We Are Not Like Them," and it's by Christine Pride and Joe Piazza. And this is a book that I read when it first came out, maybe 2023. And it's about the friendship between two women, a Black woman and a white woman. They had been friends for years, like even from kindergarten. It's a fiction, okay, it's fiction, but but they had never talked about race until the white woman's husband, who was a policeman, shot a Black man, and their relationship changed and was challenged. And I I thought it was so realistic, so honest, that it's one that I recommend for people who are rarely in situations where they talk about race, because it was forcing questions that are hard questions in our society that we rarely talk about. And so, and it's since it's fiction, it makes it easier to get into, although it wasn't fiction. So that's the book that I would recommend because, um, as social workers, I assume you're serving a very mixed communities. You're going to be in communities that you're serving. I don't know where you're going to serve or work, but my guess is they will be diverse places, maybe places that you didn't come from initially, and learning to think carefully about who you are and doing your own work as you engage working in communities, I think is so important. So that's why I recommend this book.
I haven't heard of it. I'm going to track it down as soon as I possibly can.
It's great. I was really taken with it and tried to get some book clubs that were reading things like Right Fragility or this or that. I said, try this book. It's really accessible in a different way.
Well, and I really enjoy being able to read something for pleasure, which does not get to happen very often,
Right.
that I can learn from and that is good at capturing the human experience.
Yes, so do I.
That's important to me. I only have a couple more questions for you, Edith, and so I want to remind our viewers that we are coming up to our final minutes with Edith. If you have some other questions that you would like to pose to her, I am curious given given the variety of environments that you've worked in on lots of different kinds of social problems and injustices, what does equity and or equality mean to you? And what does it look like to be anti-oppressive in our work?
Whoa. Um,
Do we need more than our last 10 minutes for that?
yeah. Equity is hard because it's different things for different populations, I think. You know, for persons of color, especially Black people who had such a history of enslavement, and the Native American population, equity might look different than it might for LGBTQ people, because unless you're an LGBTQ person of color. So equity, I think, means having the opportunity uh, to achieve equality, having the opportunity to say, okay, the field has never been level. The playing field has never been level. And so I now have the opportunity to somehow level the playing field because I've been given an opportunity, because people have recognized that the field was never level. I have the ability, I have the skill set, I have the training, I can do it. And I've been given an opportunity to jump ahead a little bit, just a little bit, because I may need, I mean, our schools are still so inequitable. I mean, if you go to a wealthy school or you go to a school in the center of Cleveland, you will find the resources are so different. And so that is not those kids that come out of those schools in Cleveland, that is not an equitable situation. They are not starting out with a level playing field. And so how do we account for that in some way? Um, I think we have to recognize that that's a reality. It's just a reality. And I don't know how to make it go away. It's not going to go away. We can't just ignore it. It's endemic into our country. It's in the ground of our country. So how do we then make needed accommodations? That doesn't mean hiring people who aren't qualified or da 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 da, all those things we have heard. But if I'm interviewing people and I have a diverse pool and two people have the same great qualifications, I might choose the woman instead of the white male because I know that the playing field has not been leveled. I might choose a person of color because they are equally qualified to do the job. And I know the playing field has not been leveled. I might choose a person that has a person with disabilities, not because they have disabilities, but because they can do the job and their diversity and their voice and their presence will add something to the organization.
Mm. One of our anonymous viewers would like to know what gives you courage.
Um, Well, it's nice of her to think that I him or her to say that or them that I have courage. Thank you. But you know, I've been to I don't know if you've been to the EJI Center, Equal Justice Initiative in Birmingham. If you've ever been there, you know Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy. People talk about the lynching museum in Birmingham. Um, I've been there 3 times. And it tells the story of the African American experience from slavery all the way to now, the Great Migration, all of that. And every time I go, I am so angry as I'm walking through those halls. But by the time I come out, I am so grateful, um, inspired, um, determined, and hopeful because I think of what people have gone through over the years. And for me to be able to do the kind of work I do, to have the voice that I have, is because of the work that other people have done. And so that is what gives me hope, gives me courage that if someone didn't speak out, then I would not be able to speak out now. So that is really what gives me courage. And quite frankly, my age gives me courage. What are they going to do to me? You know, you know, I don't have a job that I have to report to, you know, I can speak out in ways that some people cannot right now. And so that is a privilege that I intend to exploit.
Thank you for doing so. because not all of us feel safe enough in our roles or places in our lives to be able to do that as loudly.
I know that. That would have been true for me at one time. So I'm in a different space now. So I can do it.
We thank you. I'm not sure if viewers can actually read the questions or if that's something I get to read. But Craig, who you know, says, Edith, thank you for your personal witness and work. For faith leaders who are genuinely interested in learning more, or I recommend for anybody who's interested in learning more, please attend a PFLAG support group to hear the voices of the LGBTQI community and those who love us. I promise that you will leave changed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the only way to keep people from changing is to not let other people speak. You know, suppression of stories. If you hear people's stories, uh, they can be changed. People's minds, hearts and minds can be changed by hearing the stories of other people. Very important.
Absolutely. And a key advocacy skill.
Absolutely. Storytelling and listening.
Yes.
So,
Do you have any parting words for our viewers and for people who may be watching this from months from now?
well, I can say right now, your voices and your commitment to justice is so needed. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you can make a difference. You may not even know who you're influencing, but just don't give up or give in because that's what they want. So I want to thank those of you who are doing or in the field of social work. It's not an easy field. It's an underappreciated field, but your work really matters, especially those of you who are in the clinical world. Thank you so much. That patience, that persistence, that support is so needed. And for those of you who are here as my church people, I see some names. Uh, I know you're speaking out already, and I know you will not stop. So thank you for that as well.
Edith, thank you so much. You've brought an incredible cross section of people together to hear from you today. And if we could all give a round of snaps and applause for Dr. Edith, woman of many firsts, Guffey, I would be thrilled.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. And for all of you who took the time to come. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. There's a thanks in the Q&A and a book recommendation question. I will get the name of the book and that will be in the follow-up email that is sent to all registrants so that people have that available because that does sound like something that might be a gentler way for people
Yes,
to learn and have some conversation.
definitely.
All right. We are with you, Edith, as you continue this advocacy work and you continue the policy and legal battles that PFLAG is supporting and enacting. And whatever we can do for you, know that we are here cheering for you and that you can call upon us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank all of
Th-
you. So thank you, Sherry.
Thank you. Everyone, I hope you have a wonderful evening and that you feel like you have learned something about PFLAG, something about humanity, and something about advocacy. May you all be well. Good night.